Taken out slave huts, being chained, Seca would be forced to go inside the huts having black women slaves. He would go inside, losing his humanity and dignity, behind closed doors and impregnate tens of black women slaves every day. Don't forget, we are talking about a human being, not an animal. In 1808, the United States took the important step of prohibiting the transatlantic slave trade, marking the end of importing new African slaves into the country. However, this did not bring an end to the institution of slavery itself. Existing slave owners were allowed to retain the black slaves they held in bondage, setting the stage for a disturbing and tragic chapter in the lives of black African slaves already residing in America. The ban on importing new slaves prompted some slave owners to establish breeding farms, a practice like the breeding of animals where the sole objective was reproduction. In this sad system, black men and women slaves were forced to mate to produce a large number of black children who would be slaves too. Much like the selective breeding of animals, white supremacist slave owners sought out black men with strong physical traits to mate with black women. They were looking for individuals who possessed robust and muscular attributes, much like the breeding of livestock. In this harrowing part of history, there emerges the story of a black slave man named Seca, who was tragically forced to mate with hundreds of black women slaves, resulting in the birth of over 200 children. But what were the conditions under which Seca and the black women slaves were subjected to this forced breeding? Let's know the whole story.
The Black History Archives.
Following the ban on the transatlantic slave trade, many black slaves endured harsh labor conditions that led to suffering and loss of their lives. This situation created a shortage of slaves, posing a significant problem for slave owners whose profits were at stake. Desperate for a swift solution, they devised a nasty plan that could only be conceived by those who viewed humans as mere commodities. This horrific scheme dehumanized people, treating them as if they were no different from livestock, such as cows or horses, and stripping them of their fundamental human rights. It was called slave breeding. The chilling concept behind this plan involved forcing black African women slaves to have more children. Under the law, these children were automatically considered slaves since their mothers were enslaved. It revealed how the state and legislative authorities had intentionally left a legal loophole that allowed slavery to persist even after the transatlantic slave trade was banned. The legislation passed in 1808 was known as the Act Prohibiting the Importation of Slaves, but it did not abolish slavery itself. Slave owners saw the reproductive capacity of black women slaves as a means to produce more slaves. These women were forced into having more children, even against their will. During this dark period, terms like breeders, breeding slaves, childbearing women, breeding period, and too old to breed became disturbingly common. This heinous practice aimed to address the shortage of slaves, even though it inflicted lasting harm on future generations of the enslaved. Within this grim era, one name stands out: Seca. He became infamous for fathering an extraordinarily large number of children, equal to an entire village. His children would, in turn, be also enslaved. They would work on cotton and sugar plantations. Seca was taken to slave breeding farms, where he was compelled to mate with black women slaves. It's just sad and heartbreaking to know that black women slaves waited for Seca to come and impregnate them. No concept of consent existed. Even Seca could not do anything because he was forced, and if he refused, he would be beaten until he died. He endured dehumanizing treatment, like a valuable breeding animal, whose children would inherit his powerful traits. Given his muscular physique and ability to perform strenuous plantation labor without pause, his children were destined to inherit the same attributes. Slave owners recognized this biological advantage that Seca possessed and sought to capitalize on it. However, behind the title Seca lay a true identity: Roque José Florencio, a black man born in the heart of Africa, whose life became entangled with the brutal chains of enslavement within the borders of Brazil. Roque's existence was tarnished by a tragic role that robbed him of his humanity and autonomy. He was reduced to a mere instrument for the benefit of his owner, forced to mate with whomever his masters commanded, solely to produce more slave children. These children, from the moment of their birth, were groomed to become the next generation of slaves destined for plantation labor. They too would be forced into slave breeding to preserve their strong traits, creating a formidable workforce. The ultimate aim was to maintain an ideal number of slaves that could sustain the entire institution of slavery. They were made to mate and reproduce, mirroring the breeding practices of animals, all to increase the enslaved population without the need for further imports from Africa. Pata Seca belonged to the town of Sorocaba in Sao Paulo. His life was marked by the grim reality of bondage. His ownership shifted to a farmer named Francisco da Cunha Bueno in São Carlos, Sao Paulo, and from there, he found himself trapped within the confines of captivity. However, Pata Seca's story was different from the typical life of plantation labor. His owner, Francisco, entrusted him with unconventional responsibilities that extended beyond the traditional scope of slave labor. Roque's duties involved tending to the farm and traveling between rural villages and the bustling city of São Carlos. It's crucial to distinguish these farms from typical animal farms. These were slave breeding farms where black African women slaves were held for the sole purpose of breeding, much like animals forced to mate. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community and we need your support. Let's continue now. Pata Seca was pushed to mate with black women slaves, after which these women were forced to return to their punishing work on the plantations. Even while carrying babies in their bellies, they would work the entire day on the cotton and sugarcane plantations. Pata Seca's towering stature, standing at an impressive 7 feet and 2 inches, along with his lean legs, formidable hands and feet, earned him the moniker Pata Seca, which meant dry paw. This name stemmed from a custom among the black slaves on the farm, where they were assigned animal names. Due to Pata Seca's physical attributes, which allowed harsh labor, his owner forced him to mate with all the black women slaves on the farm. This way, the slave children born would inherit his tall height, muscular physique, and strong hands, traits that promised greater profits for the slave owners. Not only that, but black women slaves from the nearby towns were brought to be impregnated by Pata Seca. Superstitions of the time believed that tall men with lean legs were more likely to father male offspring, a highly sought-after trait for labor-intensive tasks. Thus, Roque was thrust into the role of a breeder by his owner, tasked with impregnating the female slaves on the farm. Pata Seca's legacy extends across generations. Today, approximately 30% of the population in the district of Santa Eudoxia, São Carlos, can trace their roots back to him. His role as a breeder aimed to bolster his owner's workforce, infusing it with genetically advantageous traits. His life became a reflection of manipulation, controlled by his owner's desires. He was meticulously examined for diseases, provided with nourishment, and treated as though he were livestock. The exact number of women Roque impregnated and the frequency of these intercourses remain shrouded in mystery. However, it is believed that his legacy includes over 240 children, who carried his genes to countless generations of slaves. These children, products of his lineage, were born into the same chains of enslavement. Their lives mirrored the fate of their father, a life of subjugation, labor, and cruelty. Some were sold as commodities, their worth measured by profit, while others were condemned to work on their owners' lands, their innocent childhoods stolen away. During the horrors of this era, Pata Seca's life followed a distinct trajectory, driven by his extraordinary ability to father offspring. His prowess as a breeder won him favor from his owner, granting him privileges that set him apart. However, it's vital to note that this distinction did not shield him from the horrors faced by other black slaves during that time. However, these accounts seem to overlook a crucial fact. Pata was stripped of his human dignity. Punishing less and bonding in slavery less intensely is not a favor of any kind. In the end, the only tangible asset that remained with Pata after years of labor and fathering hundreds of children was a patch of land. With the abolition of slavery in 1888, a new chapter of life started for Pata Seca. He fell in love with a woman named Palmyra, leading to the birth of 9 children. This family, nurtured on the land granted by his former master, became the cornerstone of his life. As a free man, Pada Seca started a journey to turn his dreams into reality. He channeled his efforts into creating a better life for his family, embracing the role of a farmer and establishing his territory, which he named Sitio Pada Seca. Amidst the fields, he cultivated and sold sugarcane. Although his earnings remained modest, they provided the sustenance that nourished his family's well-being and fueled his aspirations. Pada Seca's life journey reached its conclusion on June 13, 1958, when he reached the unprecedented age of 130. As the final chapter of his life unfolded, he found peace lying in his bed in Santa Eudoxia, Brazil, surrounded by loved ones who sang heartfelt songs and offered solemn prayers, paying tribute to the legacy he had woven throughout his years. Pada Seca had witnessed a series of historical events in Brazil. He had witnessed the tide of change that brought an end to slavery in 1888, the declaration of the Republic in 1889, the rise and fall of various leaders, the upheaval of 2 world wars, and the emergence of social movements. Isn't the life of Pada Seca a poignant reminder that slavery surpassed all forms of ethics and morals? What do you think when the West proclaims itself as the most sophisticated, despite inflicting such painful things on blacks? Please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon. You can check out more videos on our channel too.